Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodons Mods. This is Otaku Showboat and today we'll be discussing chromium processing. If you've been enjoying these tutorials thus far, please be sure to do all of the engagement and social stuff below the video. As always, this series is supported by my patrons on Patreon at patreon.com/otakushowboat. You can also support Pyanodons Mods development at patreon.com/pyanodon. Oh, chromium. Oh, chromium. So, this is not just going to be chromium, this is also going to be gold. That's why at the bottom of this Hellmod production line there is gold down here. We will discuss that because it's branched off of chromium and is its own little tiny chain that requires you to go a certain depth into chromium. So we will talk about that, but oh god, chromium. It has undergone very recently a number of edits to fix some issues with its balance. So this is the current, as of this video, release to help fix the balance. There is one more thing being addressed right now. The commit that fixes the one more thing has already been posted onto the GitHub for Pyrot and it will be released at some point in the relatively near future from the creation of this video. So expect this to happen. It's very low priority because, as it turns out, it's not that big of a deal, and we'll discuss that as well. What the current little inconsistency is, but yeah, it was. We'll suffice it to say it was not particularly well balanced before, and now it is far, far better balanced than it was. So let us begin with the tech screen for chromium processing today. So at red science level of chromium processing, you will get access to grade 1 processing into plates. However, grade 1 is made into chromite sand, and chromium is unique in that your processing of chromium ore, as it gets more and more complex, will simply output more chromite sand, and the casting of the sand will either be direct casting, that you get access to now, or casting of the molten, and the molten will come from sand, or it will come from reduced or sintered. Sand, reduced, or sintered. You reduce or sinter, well, you reduce then sinter the sand. As it turns out, there's one other thing that I will need to make note of, and that is the fact that high-grade sintering across all of the various ore types has been completely deleted in the code. It is order 66. It is gone. It will no longer exist when the next release of Pyrot ores is released. It was superfluous. It was awful. There was no reason whatsoever on any ore line that goes up through sintering to do high grade to sinter high grade. It was always better to reduce the high grade and then sinter the reduced to get twice the output compared to sintering reduced. It was always better to reduce than sinter, and you never get access to sintering before reduction. You always get access to reduction before sintering. Which, yeah, that's a thing. It's gone now. I don't need to talk about it anymore. I won't talk about it anymore going forward. That is that. It is a done and dusted deal. At green science, in the base Pi suite, you will get access to grade 3 into chromite sand and grade 4 into chromite sand. And we will have a deeper look at this. Note that if you are running PyBlock in the current state of PyBlock as of this recording, you get molten casting of chromium at chromium processing 2. if you are not using PyBlock, or if it's been updated in PyBlock to revert that change, remove that change, you normally would get access to your molten casting of chromite sand at blue science. Now, this may also change to be pushed to green as part of the main pie suite, so do keep in mind that things do change over time, and I don't do these updates until there's some pretty major changes that need to be addressed. In this case, there was the big hot air overhaul thing that really changes how you treat the early game processing of ores, as well as several other things with the release of Alien Life. So that's why we're going over this again. If you want to see all of these production lines, by the way, just to point that out, if you want to see all of the production lines as it is with gold as well, I have my original video where I go over that. Just know that in terms of like the early hot air stuff, that no longer exists, but the overall structure of the full chain through sintering, it's identical to how it was. It's identical now to how it was then, so you can very easily go and still watch that video and still get a lot of good information out of it, and a suggestion of how to build it, to get a visual indicator to how this sort of looks, uh, somewhat at ratio. I think I built it to some degree of ratio to process 15 ore per second. So, yeah, with that, note that at Blue Science you also get access to a ferrochromium alloy, as well as, of course, the hot air molten casting. And you get access to reduction. This is why I was saying that maybe you might see that the main mod for the Pi Suite actually gets the molten chromium at processing 2 at some point, because you do sort of also get reduction at blue here, and you'll notice that there's a pretty big jump in output going from non-molten grade 4 to then molten pulp 7 at blue science. It's a huge jump. Actually, it's a huge jump even to go into the processed chromite processing into chromite sand. So at blue science you get high grade chromite, as well as chromite pulp 7, and there was a process, or there was high grade, and then there's pulp 7. So at high grade, it doesn't stop at high grade. That's the other interesting thing about chromium processing, is normally at blue science high grade is the tip top highest you go, but for chromium you go from high grade and you continue all the way up to this pulp 7, and that also makes additional chromite sand, and that process gives you additional chromite solution that's then used to make gold. Although you can use it to do more chromite sand, it's generally speaking going to be better to use it to do gold when you do get access to the gold part of this chain at production science, at purple science. So lots of intricacies here with the chromium, because at blue science you can't do anything with the chromite solution yet. You need purple science to actually use the chromium solution to make gold. You can see the gold processing tech right here. It's using production science packs. And of course, at level 4, you get access to sintering, and that's going to be a huge improvement to your output at sintering if you choose to go down that route. Slash, if you have some sort of a production goal that's going to extend the time that you spend in the game beyond beyond the initial creation of space science. Sintering in general, I think, only really comes into effect as a useful process to consider if you are not just going to stop at space science, which I'm pretty sure the majority of people who choose to continue past Circuit 2s would simply stop at space science and consider themselves complete having a complete experience at space science. But for those of us who are mildly insane, who have done this a couple of times already, uh, and have a actual production goal of say 1, 5, 10 science per second of all the sciences, then yeah, sintering is fine. That definitely, it's almost required to do sintering for the most part. And then of course there's the whole gold chain at purple we need to have a look at as well. And this does actually produce a couple of chromium plates as a byproduct, so we can have a look at all of this now through the power of the Hell mod. So we will begin at the very beginning of direct casting of ore into plates. You will, generally speaking, never do this. Chromium, in order to mine it, requires syngas, which means that at minimum you are going to be at red science before you even get any amounts of chromium ore in the first place. So, generally speaking, you'll have access to this next step, which is the grade 1 processing into chromite sand. Although you do need to note that it is going to take carbon dioxide, which at red science you should really be using the biomass carbon dioxide recipe and not the Coke recipe for carbon dioxide. You will also need access to sand castings to cast chromite sand. Uh, this is going to mean that you need to have access to a source of tar of any description. And of course, limestone is free, it's water, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And there's our 15 per second. This is a decent ratio, 5 to 1 ratio of ore into plates at grade 1. Now we get into the slight imbalance that's going to be changed fairly shortly, and that is this next step, which is grade 3 chromite sand casting. You'll notice here that you end up with less chromite sand at grade 3 than you do at grade 1. That is unintended, which is why the actual recipe for grade 3, we filter by product here. Actually, no, it's the chromite sand from grade 3 that's going to change here by product. So in the current state, it's 1 chromite grade 3 into 4 chromite sand. If this was 1 into 5, it would make it equal to the grade 1 output. If it was 1 into 6, it would be equal to the grade 4 output at the next step. So the solution lies literally in between, where 1 equals 5.5 chromite sand, which is why, per my original suggestion, it has been changed and will be updated soon to be 2 chromite grade 3 into 11 chromite sand. That is 1 to 5.5, and that puts it at the exact in between grade 1 and grade 4 casting. So that's the change that will happen. It will be the average of, in this case, if we have 15 ore in, between 3 and 3.6. It'll be 3.3. It'll be 3.25, I guess, or whatever, because this Hellmod rounds, I'm assuming that this is, like, not quite 3.6, or maybe it is. I don't know, because Hellmod rounds. And it rounds to the nearest 10th. I wish I could set it to round to the nearest 100th or 1000th place, but I have not found any way in which to do so in here. I have not discovered this yet among all of the preferences for Hellmod. I really want... See, there's this element number format that we could do the extra thing, but that... I don't think that affects here. That doesn't really affect here. Like, you can have the factory number format. Oh, there it is. It does. Yay! It does let you do thousandths, but through this setting, it lets you see the thousandths. I want even more. I want one more. Like, that would be great. So this is a true 3.6. So it would be a true 3.3 at grade 3. This is going to change to 3.3. Now, why would you ever stop at grade 3? Even after this update? You're not. So we're talking about something that few people are ever going to do anyway, which is actually stop at grade 3 and not continue all the way down to grade 4 processing. Because obviously grade 4 is the highest level that you get access to at Green Science. You're going to continue all the way down grade 4. Um, Otherwise, yeah, that's just going to be the way it is. However, grade 4 does introduce a concept that is present in many of the processing setups. Oh, I know why. I know why one would stop at grade 3 rather than go all the way up to grade 4. There is one very specific reason why you would stop at grade 3 and not go all the way up to grade 4, and that is the fact that this is a hydrocyclone at the grade 4 step. So the hydrocyclone here means that you will not be able to do this grade 4 processing until you have access to niobium, and that absolutely delays when you can do this grade 4 processing. So the only event where you will stop at grade 3 rather than grade 4 is if you are upgrading your chromium before you have niobium. But let me just point out one very specific important thing here. You do not need a consistent demand of chromium until rubber. And even like that's not even a consistent demand at rubber. That is the non-zero amounts demand in order to actually make a building. You are going to be consuming chromium to make buildings at red, and at green, yes, you'll begin to use some amounts of chromium, relatively consistency, primarily through some alloys, plural. Specifically, you'll be using nichrome to get into circuit 2s. You'll also need ferrochromium alloy. You'll also be using tin chromium alloy to make to do some oil processing if you so desire. And you'll use chromium itself in some of as a catalyst for some processes eventually. Are you going to need to go up to grade 3 to set yourself up at grade 3 from grade 1? Probably not. Probably not. Like, is it going to be worth that extra 0.3 for 15 ore out? Is it really going to be worth that that 0.3? Or even that 0.6? Probably not. Probably not. You are going to want to mine more, absolutely, but you're probably just going to want to stick to grade 1 for a while, and then consider upgrading into grade 4 after getting the niobium. You really can just skip grade 3. But if you really want to, just note that at this moment in time, this brief moment in time, right before the next release of Pyra ores, it does have lower output than grade 1. But once that update is sent, it's going to be 3.3 for 15 and be viable for use because the hydrocyclone here at to make grade 4. So once you crush into grade 1 and once you impact crush into your 3 and 2 and screen out your grade 2 back to more grade 1, there's a loop right there. Your grade 1 adds up to 3.45 thanks to the power of the matrix solver solving this series here. We know that we have a total of 1.73 grade 3 out from this loop, but this is processing more than that. Why? Because we have rejects that go and make you more grade 3, and this gets processed back into additional grade 4. So we can see here that for 15 ore in, we make about 2.16 chromite grade 4 going into chromite sand, and that's going to make us 3.6 plates. This is significantly higher when you do have access to the molten recipe. So the first thing that you're going to do at Blue Science, when you get access to Blue Science, is you're going to start molten casting your chromite sand from grade 4. Because that is something you can absolutely do. It does not matter how you get your chromite sand. Through whatever process you get your chromite sand, you can make it into molten, which means that the molten unlock literally upgrades the output of the entire processing chain. Except for the direct ore into plates. It upgrades the output of grade 1 chromite sand. It upgrades the output of grade 3 chromite sand, of the grade 4, of the high grade, of the pulp 7, etc., etc. Well, it ends at pulp 7. And then when you get access to the reduction, you can literally reduce the chromite sand coming out of grade 1 chromite processing. Like, you can do that. That is a thing that you can do. You can reduce and sinter chromite sand made out of grade 1 chromite. That is an option for you. There's lots and lots of intricacies involved with this chromite sand stuff. You could even make chromite sand out of literally nothing. Whoops, that was not intended. You can make chromite sand quite literally out of rich dust, out of iron, or out of sand. You can do sand into rich dust. Like, this is a thing that you can do. You can just make rich dust from nothingness, from water. If you don't have access to a chromium ore, this is how you can do it. So you have lots of options to get into chromite sand that you can then reduce. And the reduction's been fixed now so that you can actually end up with more molten out of the reduced than out of the chromite sand, because that was a problem a while ago. So let us move on from our grade 4 that has been hydro-classified and ball milled to get all of that grade 4 and then solid separated into chromite sand. From our grade 4, we will now agitate that grade 4 with sodium hydroxide and water to make chromite pulp 1 that we will floatate in a flotation cell with some of this stuff called Aerofloat 15. This stuff is one of the most evil of the outside inputs required in the Pi raw ores processing setups. One of the most evil of the evil. And it's used in a couple of places between the Aerofloat and the crysylic acid. So crysylic acid is going to be a nexalate demand and a phenol demand and a creosote demand from tar. And it's going to need aromatics, and it's going to need this stuff called phosphorus pentasulfide, which, yeah, this stuff. Sulfur plus phosphate rock yields the pentasulfide plus pyrite that you can then add more rock to, the pyrite, to make additional phosphorus pentasulfide, and then you end up with an iron ore byproduct that you have to deal with out of here to make that phosphorus pentasulfide, which is near enough only ever used for the Aerofloat 15 in here. So yeah, that's one of the most evil of evil things in that Aerofloat 15, so do bear that in mind. It is a pretty low requirement, though, in terms of the volume per second from 15 or in. So it's highly complex, but you don't need a lot of it. And that will give you high-grade chromite, as well as a bit of chromite solution. At the moment, at Blue Science, you can only take that chromite solution and make it into additional chromite sand. And the high grade can go into chromite sand, and that'll give you... And then you can also make molten casting out of this chromite sand. Technically, you can do reduction, but you don't get reduction until Circuit 3s, so we're not going to look at that at this step. We'll look at it at the next step, which is the Pulp 7. and that'll give you a whole bunch more plates by comparison to the grade 4, right? 3.6 to 23.6 at just the high grade, let alone the full chain going up to pulp 7. Yeah, that's a bit much. This 3.6 upgrades to like a yellow belt, above a yellow belt, when you actually do molten casting of this 10.78 chromite sand. So definitely bear that in mind. It's a pretty big upgrade. At Blue Science, the first thing that you should do is upgrade whatever process you're currently doing for chromium into the molten casting. That's not even a question. You are going to want to upgrade this as soon as you get access to that molten recipe. And then you can consider maybe going further down this chain. Specifically, you're going to have to, or not, if you want gold. If you want gold through the actual gold processing chain. But we'll talk about that or not in a little bit. So the high grade, after we've floated our stuff, our pulp 1 for high grade, can then get thrown into a centrifugal pan to give us processed chromite as well as pulp stage 2. Now that processed chromite can go into a secondary crusher to become additional high-grade chromite to give us some additional pulp stage 2. This is another internal loop here. All of that pulp 2 can get leached with organic solvent into pulp 3. Pulp 3, by adding methanol in a flotation cell with pressurized air, can give you a pulp 4 and a pulp 5. The pulp 4 will get floated with tar and pressured air into 6 with more chromite solution coming out of that additional chromite solution. Do bear that in mind. And the pulp 6 will be floated with glycerol. Glorious, beautiful glycerol. And pressurized air into more high-grade chromite that loops back to the high-grade processing into pulp 2, as well as additional pulp 5. So there's another loop here. Loops within loops. We've got loops within loops. This is why the matrix solver is very handy. It is literal hell attempting to do this math by hand of when you have several of these infinite series inside of these setups. So yeah, about that. So that will then get processed, the pulp 5, in a thickener with water into pulp 7. It's just a 1-to-1 conversion, so the total pulp 5 is basically your total pulp 7. And then all of the solution can make chromite sand, and all of the pulp 7 can make chromite sand. This can be melted and give you a whole bunch of plates. But bear in mind that you do lose this 7.32 out of 16.17. You do lose all of this if you use this for gold processing instead, which, you know, it's like that's like a third of your total amount here. You just lose completely from your output of chromium plates. It cuts it by like a third, which is fine if you are going to be using chromite for gold and your concern is more towards the gold than it is towards the amount of chromium that you need. Because if you do want to do gold from your chromite solution, this process has to keep moving for as long as you need gold. It can't stop when you back up on chromium. You will be forced to void your excess amounts of, I would say, do this at the pulp 7 step. If you've backed up on your chromium plates, and you've backed up on your molten chromium from whatever other alloys you're using to make chromium, use this molten chromium from, eventually you will back up on this and still need gold. So you're going to want to keep this moving. You're also going to want to do the opposite. If you don't need as much gold as you do the chromium, or the molten chromium, you're going to need to still have some sort of an overflow of this chromite solution into your chromite sand Now, if you're backed up on both, fine, you're backed up on both, but you definitely want to make sure that they both constantly move, is the whole point here. So, at Blue Science, you also get access to reduction, and we're going to look at reduction from that Pulp 7 and see how this changes. So, we go from our 35.07 all the way up to 56.35. That is a pretty big boost just by adding sodium hydroxide and light oil to our chromite sand in a direct reduction plant. However, the direct reduction plant does require circuit 3s to make, so you're looking at doing this at Purple Science, basically. That's when you're looking at doing the reduction here, is at Purple Science. And it is absolutely worth doing if you are going this far down the chromium processing chain. It's absolutely worth doing if you do go down the chromium processing chain. Especially if you are tearing off a third of your output for converting your solution into gold. Then at Yellow Science, you do get access to sintering of that reduced product, so that is going to just be lime with syngas, pressured air, and any solid fuel to do the sintering. Pretty easy for that, as long as you can, make the sinter plants. And there you go. You get a whole bunch of stuff. Just keep in mind that if you do go into the gold route, this is cut by like a third. You lose about a third of this, 112.7 or 352.2, depending on how you want to look at it, for 15 ore in. It's a lot, but you need a lot. You need a lot over the course of the game. Gold! Let's have a look at gold briefly here. So, I'll even put in on here on this ingredient input the combined total 31.35 from Pulp 7. So we can have a look at that, 31.35. And we can see in here that from our 15 ore, going through the Pulp 7 route, we'll end up with just shy of 2 gold plates through hot air casting, which you do still have hot air casting available to you at Yellow Science, at 4 gold, even though it's not direct molten casting. So chromite solution, you'll need to add hydrogen peroxide in mixers to get this chromite mix. You'll then use a scrubber to scrub it with gravel to make chromite fines. You then have to add some sulfuric acid in a quenching tower to get chromite concentrate. Then add chlorine in a wet scrubber to make a prepared chromium that then gets cast into a small amount of plates with rejects. The point here is that you want the rejects that will then get agitated with water into gold precipitate 1. You then add cyanic acid in a leaching station to get gold concentrate. The gold concentrate with more sulfuric acid in a wet scrubber will become a precipitate 2. Add ammonia and coal dust in a wet scrubber to that 2 will give you gold solution. And then electrolyzing that solution with graphite, nichrome, as well as iron oxide will give you purified gold, and that is cast in basic oxygen furnaces with oxygen and hot air and a solid fuel for the furnace itself into some existent amount of plates. Now, I said that this was potentially completely optional, and that is because you can get gold through particle acceleration. You can particle accelerate copper to silver to gold. You can particle accelerate silver to gold that you're getting from lead, but you can just straight up skip anything involving silver in the lead processing chain by doing copper to silver to gold. And you may find that while this is very heavy on power consumption, extremely heavy on power consumption, that you'll end up with enough gold. Really, ultimately, like you'll be fine on the amount of gold that you produce if you do the particle acceleration. So that definitely consider that as an alternative to going down this whole chain. It is very much a viable alternative to just skip this and do particle acceleration. So definitely keep that in mind. With that, folks, we have covered the entirety of the intricacies that I wanted to talk about in regards to the chromium processing chain. This has been Otaku Showboat. I would, of course, like to thank you all for watching. If you have enjoyed this video and the series thus far, please be sure to do all of the engagement and social stuff below the video. This series, of course, is supported by my patrons at patreon.com/otakushowboat. You can also support Pyanodon's Mons development at patreon.com/Pyanodon. And I, of course, will see you all on the next one.